My husband left me for his young assistant, calling me unambitious for my part-time charity job. He had no idea my job was a venture capital fund, and that I was the anonymous investor who had just acquired the startup he was counting on for his entire future. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The words hung in the air of our pristine, minimalist living room, as out of place as a splash of mud on a gallery wall. I'm leaving you, Emma. My husband, Richard, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette framed against the bruised twilight of the New York skyline. He hadn't turned to look at me when he said it. For a man who preached the gospel of direct confrontation in business, his cowardice at home was staggering. I remained seated on the plush white sofa, my hands resting on a proposal I'd been reading. The pages were filled with data on biosynthetics, a potential game-changer for sustainable textiles, but the numbers and projections suddenly felt like a foreign language. I see, I said. My voice was unnervingly calm, a placid lake over a churning abyss. 25 years of marriage, and it was ending with a four-word sentence delivered to a pane of glass. He finally turned, his face a mask of strained sincerity. At 50, Richard was still a handsome man, with a patrician jaw and silvering hair he kept impeccably styled. He wore his ambition like one of his tailored suits, expensive, sharp, and designed to impress. "It's not you," he began, the most pathetic of all breakup clichés. "It's me, I've changed, my needs have changed." "Needs," I echoed, the word tasting like ash. "I need to be with someone who gets it," he said, gesturing vaguely, as if encompassing the entire world of commerce and striving that existed outside our quiet apartment. "Someone who is ambitious and driven. Someone who wants to build an empire, not just volunteer." The disdain in his voice was a physical thing, a needlepoint of condescension aimed directly at my life's work. He was talking about Amber, of course, his 26-year-old executive assistant. I wasn't a fool. I had seen the way his eyes lit up when she entered a room, the way he'd started using corporate buzzwords favored by her generation. He was a man drowning in a midlife crisis, and she was his pretty, ambitious life raft. "Your part-time charity job is admirable, Emma, it truly is," he continued, his tone sickeningly patronizing. "It's sweet, but I'm about to make the biggest move of my career. Amber and we're on the same wavelength. We're launching a startup, Innovate Next. It's going to be huge. I need a partner, not a passenger." I stared at him, my mind a maelstrom of shock, fury, and something else, a cold, crystalline clarity. He was looking at me but seeing a ghost, a caricature of a woman he'd invented to justify his betrayal. The dutiful wife, the quiet philanthropist, the gentle soul who arranged flowers and chaired fundraisers. He had no earthly idea who I really was. He had no concept of the world I moved in when I wasn't playing the part of Mrs. Richard Sterling. My part-time charity job, as he so dismissively called it, was a carefully constructed cover. Publicly, I was the head of a small nonprofit called the Phoenix Foundation, an organization dedicated to women's empowerment. But behind that gentle facade, I was GV, the founder and sole managing partner of the Phoenix Fund, a discreet but powerful venture capital firm that invested exclusively in companies founded by women who had escaped abusive or oppressive situations. I didn't just write checks, I rebuilt lives, one cap table at a time. And the irony, the glorious, staggering irony that was now blossoming in the wreckage of my marriage, was almost too much to bear. Innovate Next. The very same startup my fund had spent the last 3 months vetting. The same startup whose acquisition my board and I had just approved yesterday in a unanimous vote. The papers were already being drawn up by my lawyer, Ben. We were acquiring them through a series of shell corporations to protect the identity of the original female founder we intended to reinstate. Richard and his new girlfriend were walking into a future that I, the unambitious, content, charity-working wife, already owned. He stood there, waiting for the tears, the recriminations, the begging. He was expecting a scene from a movie where the scorned wife falls to pieces. He wanted drama to validate the magnitude of his decision. I gave him none of it. I slowly closed the proposal on my lap, the one detailing a technology that would soon be mine. I placed it neatly on the marble coffee table, rose to my feet, and looked my husband of 25 years directly in the eye. "Okay, Richard," I said. My voice even, if that's what you need. The betrayal was worse than any pain I could have imagined, a physical blow that seemed to hollow me out from the inside. But what he didn't know was that his betrayal hadn't just broken my heart. It had handed me the sword. Richard blinked, momentarily thrown. My placid acceptance was not on his script. He had rehearsed this scene, prepared for a storm, and I had given him a calm sea. It unnerved him. "That's it?" he asked, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "Just okay." "You've made your decision," I replied, walking toward our bedroom. The long hall felt like a tunnel, each step taking me further from the life I knew. "I assume you'll want to pack. Amber is likely waiting." The mention of her name, so casual and devoid of venom, seemed to deflate him further. He followed me, a confused puppy trailing in the wake of my inexplicable composure. "Well, yes, I have a bag in the car. I'll just need my things from the closet and the study." "Of course," I said, opening the heavy oak door to our shared bedroom. His side of the walk-in closet was a monument to his vanity, rows of suits, color-coded shirts, a rack of designer ties. I pulled out his empty suitcase from the top shelf and placed it on the bed. "Help yourself." I sat on the chaise lounge in the corner, a silent observer to the dismantling of our life. He moved with a grim, methodical purpose, pulling suits from their hangers and laying them in the case. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the rustle of expensive fabric and the metallic click of hangers. He was avoiding my gaze, focusing on the task as if folding a shirt correctly was the most important thing in the world. "You know," he said, his back to me, "this is for the best, Emma. In a few years, you'll see. Once Innovate Next takes off, I'll make sure you're taken care of. I'm not a monster." I almost laughed. Taken care of? He had no comprehension of my finances. My inheritance, which my shrewd father had taught me to manage, had been the seed money for the Phoenix Fund. The fund was now worth more than Richard could possibly imagine, dwarfing his senior vice president's salary and the speculative, debt-leveraged valuation of his precious startup. He thought he was the provider, the titan of industry, leaving his dependent wife a comfortable severance. The delusion was breathtaking. "That's very generous of you, Richard," I said, my voice smooth as silk. He zipped the first suitcase shut and started on a second. He was taking everything, I noted. The expensive watches from the velvet-lined drawer, the cufflinks I'd bought him for our 20th anniversary, the leather-bound books from his nightstand. He was erasing himself from the apartment with an efficiency that was both insulting and pathetic. Finally, he was done. 2 large suitcases and a briefcase stood by the door like soldiers awaiting his command. He turned to me, a final, desperate plea for validation in his eyes. "So, we're okay? No lawyers, no fighting." "You're the one who is leaving, Richard. The terms are yours to set, I suppose," I said, standing up. "I won't fight you." This was the truth. I had no intention of fighting him over the apartment or the shared bank accounts. They were pocket change. The real assets, the real power, were all tied up in the fund, in a web of trusts and legal entities so complex and discreet that his own high-priced divorce attorney would never even find a thread to pull. He looked relieved, a wave of gratitude washing over his face. He thought my compliance was weakness. He couldn't see the steel beneath the surface. He couldn't understand that I wasn't letting him go, I was cutting him loose. As he walked toward the front door, I followed. He paused with his hand on the handle, turning back one last time. "Goodbye, Emma." "Goodbye, Richard," I said, meeting his gaze with a calm that felt like a superpower. "I wish you all the success you feel you deserve." He nodded, interpreting my words as a genuine, if melancholy, farewell. He didn't catch the nuance, the double meaning laced into that single, simple sentence. He opened the door and walked out, closing it softly behind him, the sound echoing the end of an era. I stood in the foyer for a long time, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The pain was real, a deep, aching wound, but my mind was already moving, strategizing. He believed I was nothing without him. He thought my greatest ambition was a successful bake sale for the local women's shelter. They both did. Richard and his ambitious, driven Amber. They thought they were building an empire, leaving the quaint little charity worker behind. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten to ask what was in the charity's portfolio. The first few years of my marriage to Richard were a whirlwind of shared dreams. We were young, both are. Med with fresh MBAs and a ferocious appetite for success. I was the sharper analyst with a natural instinct for market trends and undervalued assets. Richard was the salesman, the charismatic networker who could charm a deal into existence. We were a formidable team. I identified the opportunities, he closed them. Our life was a spreadsheet of upward mobility, and for a while, it was enough. Then came the question of children. I wanted them, he was hesitant. It would derail our 5-year plan, he'd argued. When I finally did get pregnant, I suffered a difficult, high-risk pregnancy that forced me into early bed rest. I had to step back from the high-stress world of finance I loved. After our son, Michael, was born, Richard's career was taking off. It seemed natural, logical, for me to be the one to stay home, to raise our child, to manage the household that was the necessary backdrop for his burgeoning success. I never regretted that choice. I loved being a mother. But as Michael grew and needed me less, a familiar restlessness began to stir. I missed the game, the intellectual challenge of the market. When my father passed away, he left me a substantial inheritance. Richard saw it as a nest egg, a cushion. I saw it as capital. That was when the idea for the Phoenix Fund was born. I saw a gap in the venture capital world. It was a boys' club, driven by aggressive, often predatory dynamics. Women with brilliant ideas were frequently overlooked, underfunded, or pushed out of their own companies. Women escaping difficult personal situations, they weren't even on the radar. They were seen as liabilities, not assets. I knew better. I knew that a woman who had survived adversity possessed a resilience and a grit that no business school could teach. That was the fire I wanted to invest in. I started small, working from a discreet office I leased under the foundation's name. Ben Carter, my father's brilliant junior associate who had since become a partner at his firm, was my first and only call. He understood the vision immediately and structured the fund with impenetrable layers of legal protection. To the world, I was Emma Sterling, a devoted wife and philanthropist running a small foundation. In the closed, encrypted circles of my business, I was GV, an investor with a Midas touch and a reputation for being as tough as she was fair. Richard, meanwhile, remained blissfully ignorant. He loved the idea of his charitable wife. It reflected well on him. He'd brag to his colleagues about my selfless work while simultaneously dismissing it as a hobby. Emma keeps herself busy with her little projects, he'd say with an affectionate chuckle. It's good for her. He never once asked about the specifics, the financials, or the impact. He simply didn't care. His ego couldn't fathom a world where my little project was more successful than his entire career. My first encounter with Amber was at a company dinner a year ago. She was new, bright-eyed, and attached to Richard's side like a pilot fish on a shark. She was everything I wasn't anymore: young, overtly ambitious, and dressed in the sharp, minimalist armor of a modern corporate warrior. She'd extended a hand, her grip firm, her smile polished to a high sheen. "It's such an honor to finally meet you, Mrs. Sterling. Richard talks about you all the time." "Please call me Emma," I'd said, my own smile equally pleasant. Throughout the dinner, she directed a series of subtly pointed questions at me. They were couched in a tone of polite curiosity, but the intent was clear. She was assessing me, probing for weakness. It must be so fulfilling, the work you do with your foundation, she'd said, her head tilted. I've always admired people who are content with making a difference instead of, making a profit. The us versus them implication was obvious. She was a maker, a builder, a profit seeker. I was other. Richard, sitting beside me, beamed. My Emma has a heart of gold. She leaves the grubby business of making money to me. I just smiled. Someone has to fund the hearts of gold, Richard. My comment went right over his head, but I saw a flicker of something in Amber's eyes, not understanding, but a recalculation. She had pegged me as a simple society wife, and my response, however mild, didn't quite fit the profile. Over the next year, the change in Richard was palpable. He started staying late at the office, not for work, but for strategy sessions with Amber. He began talking about disruption and blue sky thinking, parroting the empty jargon of the startup world. He was trying to recapture his youth, and Amber was his fountain of choice. The real red flag, however, came 2 months ago. I was hosting a small dinner for some of the women my fund had backed, CEOs, innovators, and artists. Richard had promised to be there. An hour before the guests arrived, he called. Something's come up at work, Em. A crisis with the Innovate Next. T-pitch, Amber and I have to pull an all-nighter. I'm so sorry. Innovate Next. The name caught my attention. Ben had flagged it a week prior as a potential acquisition target. Its core technology, a revolutionary AI-driven logistics platform, was brilliant. The reason it was on our radar was because its original creator, a genius programmer named Dr. Aliza Sharma, had been squeezed out by her initial investors after she refused to compromise on the ethical parameters of the AI. The company was now being fronted by a new team, seeking a second round of funding. I didn't let on that I knew the name. Of course, dear, work comes first, I'd said. That night, surrounded by the brilliant women I had empowered, I felt a deep chill. My husband was canceling on me to work with his ambitious young assistant on a company whose technology was stolen from another woman. The symbolism was as potent as it was sickening. He was aligning himself with the very forces I had built my empire to fight against. Now, sitting in the silent apartment he had abandoned, I understood. This wasn't just an affair. It was a fundamental divergence of values, a clash of two worlds that had been spinning on the same axis for 25 years and had finally, irrevocably, flown apart. He had chosen the world of empty ambition and predatory tactics, and in doing so, he had made himself my opposition. The morning after Richard left, the apartment felt cavernous. The silence he had left behind was a living entity, echoing in the empty spaces in the closet and the blank spot on the wall where his favorite painting used to hang. For a few hours, I allowed the grief to wash over me. I mourned the man I had married, the future I had envisioned, the shared history that now felt like a lie. Then, I showered, dressed in a sharp blazer and slacks, and went to work. My real office, the one Richard knew nothing about, was a sleek, unassuming space on the 27th floor of a building in the financial district. It was leased under Carter Holdings, one of the many legal entities Ben had set up for me. The door simply said private offices. Inside, a small, fiercely loyal team of 4 managed the day-to-day operations of the Phoenix Fund. They knew me only as GV. They were impeccably professional, discreet, and brilliant at their jobs. I walked into the conference room, and Ben Carter was already there, a file folder and 2 cups of coffee on the polished granite table. Ben was in his early 40s, with a mind like a steel trap and a calm demeanor that could soothe the most panicked CEO. He was more than my lawyer. He was my co-conspirator and my closest friend. He was the only one in the world, besides me, who knew the whole truth. I heard, he said simply, his expression a mixture of concern and anger. Are you all right? I will be, I said, taking a seat. But we need to move, the Innovate Next acquisition. It's no longer just a business deal, Ben, it's personal. He nodded, pushing the folder toward me. I anticipated that. I've already had my team accelerate the due diligence. Everything is clean. The tech is solid, the patents are secure. The current leadership, however, he grimaced. They're amateurs, riding on Dr. Sharma's coattails and running the company into the ground with reckless spending. Leadership being Richard Sterling and Amber Collins, I said, my voice flat. Exactly, Ben confirmed. They've positioned themselves as the co-founders of this new iteration of the company. They're seeking a buyout from a major investor. They think they're about to cash in on years of Aliza Sharma's work. This was the clever trap, the leverage I held. It wasn't just a random company. It was a company built on a foundation of injustice, the exact type of situation the Phoenix Fund was created to rectify. My personal and professional worlds had collided in the most spectacular fashion. "What's our play?" I asked, my mind shifting fully from grieving wife to calculating investor. "The strategy is already in motion," Ben explained, tapping the folder. "We've been negotiating the acquisition through 2 shell corporations. The final offer is being made by a third, Ethelred Capital. It's a name that sounds like old, established money. It's untraceable back to us. They've already accepted our initial offer in principle. They're desperate. Their cash burn rate is unsustainable." "They'll be celebrating," I mused, thinking they've found their whale. "They'll be insufferable," Ben corrected with a wry smile. "They've requested a final in-person meeting to sign the papers. They want to meet the principal of Ethelred Capital. They want to shake the hand of the person making them rich." A cold thrill ran down my spine. "And we'll grant them that meeting." "Emma," Ben said, his tone shifting from legal advisor to concerned friend. "You don't have to do this. We can have one of our associates stand in as the principal. We can finalize the deal, take control, and you can fire them via a memo. You don't have to put yourself in a room with him." I appreciated his concern, his desire to protect me from more pain. But he was underestimating me, just as Richard had. This wasn't about pain anymore. It was about justice. It was about looking the man who called me unambitious in the eye as I took control of his entire future. "No, Ben," I said, my voice firm. "I have to be there. I need to be the one to close this deal. It's not just about the company or the money. It's about the message. For him, for her, and for Dr. Sharma, who we are going to make whole again." My investigation wasn't about digging for dirt. It was about the meticulous, strategic execution of a flawless corporate takeover. Over the next 2 weeks, I was a ghost in the machine of my own making. I worked with Ben and my team to structure the deal with surgical precision. We drafted the new employment contracts. We outlined the transition plan. We arranged for Dr. Aliza Sharma to be flown in, putting her up in a hotel under an assumed name. I met with her in secret, explaining the situation. The hope that dawned in her eyes when she realized she was going to get her company back was all the confirmation I needed that I was on the right path. During this time, I received a single email from Richard. It was brief and formal, sent from his new personal account. It was a list of his demands for the divorce settlement, the apartment, half of our liquid assets, and lifetime alimony, citing my lack of career prospects and his need to maintain the lifestyle to which we were both accustomed. I forwarded it to Ben with a 1-word instruction: "File this." He would deal with the petty squabbles over furniture and bank accounts later. I was busy buying a company. The contrast was so stark, so utterly absurd, that it solidified my resolve. He was fighting for the scraps, while I was taking the whole feast. He was so focused on the past that he couldn't see the future I was building, a future he was about to become a footnote in. The first shot was fired not in a boardroom, but via a sterile, legally binding email. 2 days before the scheduled signing meeting, Ben, acting as legal counsel for Ethelred Capital, sent the official acquisition notice to Innovate Next's board, which consisted of Richard, Amber, and 2 silent partners who had put up the initial seed money. The email was a masterpiece of corporate legalese, cold, impersonal, and utterly final. It confirmed that Ethelred had completed its due diligence and was executing its option to purchase 100% of the company's shares. The effect was immediate. My phone rang less than 10 minutes after the email was sent. It was Richard. I let it go to voicemail. I needed to control the flow of information, and a direct conversation at this stage would only muddy the waters. His message was a breathless, exultant ramble. "Emma, you're not going to believe this. It's happening. Ethelred Capital came through. The deal is done. We're signing in 2 days. We're rich, Emma, rich. Amber is a genius. I knew this was the right move. I told you. I told you this was the big one." Listening to his voice, so full of arrogant triumph, I felt a strange detachment. He was a character in a play, and I was the playwright, watching him deliver his lines, oblivious to the final act. He still saw me as his confidant, the person he would share his victories with, even as he was building a new life with someone else. The sheer, unadulterated ego of it was stunning. The real confrontation, however, came from Amber. An hour later, an email from her landed in my personal inbox. It was the first time she had ever contacted me directly. Subject: a quick note. "Dear Emma, I'm writing to you because Richard is so excited, and I wanted to reach out personally. I know this transition must be difficult for you, and I want to assure you that Richard and I are committed to making sure you are comfortable. With the success of Innovate Next now secured, our financial future is incredibly bright. Richard mentioned that he sent over some preliminary thoughts on the divorce settlement. I hope you'll see them as the generous offer they are. He feels a great sense of responsibility for you. We both do. After all, you've dedicated your life to your home and your charity work, and you shouldn't have to worry about your future. We're on the cusp of something amazing here. I hope, in time, you'll come to understand that this was for the best for everyone. Sincerely, Amber Collins." I read the email twice, each word dripping with condescension masked as magnanimity. Her financial future was bright. They felt a responsibility for me. I shouldn't have to worry. It was a masterclass in patronizing prose. She was marking her territory, establishing herself as the new matriarch, the benevolent provider to the poor, abandoned wife. The foolishness of it was what struck me most. They were celebrating a victory whose terms they didn't even understand. They had been so blinded by the top-line number in the offer that they hadn't bothered to scrutinize the fine print, the clauses Ben and I had so carefully embedded in the acquisition agreement. Clauses that gave the new parent company absolute control over staffing, strategy, and leadership. I didn't reply to either of them. My silence was a weapon they couldn't comprehend. They expected hysterics or grateful tears. I gave them nothing. My lack of response was a void in their narrative, a loose thread in the victory tapestry they were weaving. The first hint that their narrative was beginning to unravel came the next day, in a panicked call from Richard to Ben's office. My lawyer recounted the conversation to me with quiet satisfaction. "He's seen the final signature packet," Ben told me over the phone. "Specifically, the board restructuring clause. He's starting to ask questions. He wanted to know why the employment contracts for him and Ms. Collins are structured as at-will and terminable without cause. He called it aggressive." "What did you tell him?" I asked, a small smile playing on my lips. "I told him it was standard practice for Ethelred Capital," Ben said. "I explained that the firm invests in technology, not teams, and always retains full discretion over leadership to protect its investment. I assured him it was just a formality." He didn't sound assured. The seed of doubt had been planted. Their dream deal was starting to feel less like a partnership and more like a surrender. They were no longer the conquering heroes, they were employees. And their new boss was a mysterious entity that demanded total control. This was the first true reveal, not of my identity, but of my power. They were beginning to understand that the person on the other side of the table wasn't just a benefactor writing a check. They were dealing with a predator just like them. The difference was, I was better at it. They were so focused on the money that they had willingly, eagerly, sold the one thing they truly craved: control. And they had sold it to me. The day before the signing, the atmosphere shifted from triumphant confusion to outright panic on their end. The carefully constructed world of Richard and Amber began to crumble, not with a bang, but with a series of frantic, ill-conceived maneuvers. Richard, having been stonewalled by Ben's corporate platitudes, tried a different tactic. He showed up at the apartment. I was in my home office, on a video call with a nervous CEO of a biotech firm in Portland, coaching her through a negotiation with a supplier. The doorman buzzed up. "Mr. Sterling is here to see you, ma'am. He says it's an emergency." I felt a jolt of annoyance. He was invading my sanctuary, trying to use our shared history as leverage. "Let him come up," I said, ending my call with a promise to reconnect later. When I opened the door, Richard looked haggard. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a desperate edge to his eyes. He barged past me into the foyer. "Emma, you have to help me," he began, his voice strained. "This Ethelred deal? Something's not right. Their lawyers are stonewalling me. The contract is ironclad. We'll have no say, no power. It's a total buyout, not a partnership." I feigned a look of mild concern. "I'm not sure what I can do, Richard. I don't know these people." "But you know people like them?" he insisted, grasping at straws. "The wealthy, old money types. Your foundation must deal with them all the time. Can't you make a call, find out who this principal is? Maybe you can talk to them, explain that I need to retain some control. For my legacy." The sheer audacity of it left me momentarily speechless. He had left me because I wasn't ambitious enough, and now he was crawling back, asking me to use the very connections he disdained to salvage the deal that was supposed to be his great escape. "Richard," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "My work is in charity, remember? We help the powerless, not the powerful. I'm afraid you're on your own in that world." He stared at me, frustration warring with desperation on his face. My refusal, my calm detachment, was something he couldn't process. I was not playing my assigned role of the supportive, heartbroken ex-wife. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ben. "Ms. Collins just attempted to serve us with a counteroffer from a new investment group. It's amateurish. Looks like it was drafted on the internet. We rejected it." They were flailing, trying to create a bidding war that didn't exist, spooking the only real buyer they had. Their desperation was making them sloppy. "I have to go," Richard said abruptly, defeated. I have to think." He left without another word. The case I was building wasn't a legal one against him, but a psychological one. Every move I made, every piece of informat, I allowed to leak, was designed to dismantle his confidence and expose the flimsy foundation of his new life. The final piece of irrefutable proof I needed wasn't about Richard's incompetence, but about Amber's. Ben's due diligence team had uncovered something beautiful. Innovate Next's core AI, the very engine of their entire platform, was protected by a complex digital watermark embedded deep in the source code by its creator, Dr. Sharma. It was her unique digital signature, an elegant piece of coding that was almost impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look. Dr. Sharma had provided Ben with the key. Furthermore, Amber had filed a provisional patent for the enhanced version of the AI under her own name, failing to mention Dr. Sharma's foundational work. It was a clear, documented case of intellectual property theft. She wasn't just an ambitious co-founder, she was a fraud. This was the checkmate. This was the proof that would not only justify my takeover, but would also serve as the immutable grounds for their termination. I wasn't just firing them because of an unprofessional personal relationship. I was firing them for cause, for theft. That evening, I met with Dr. Sharma and Ben in the conference room. I laid out the plan for the next day's meeting. Dr. Sharma was nervous but resolute. She had been cheated and dismissed, and now she was being given the chance to reclaim her life's work. "Tomorrow," I told her, "you will no longer be a victim. You will be the head of innovation for a company that is rightfully yours." Richard and Amber thought they were sharks in a sea of minnows. They never realized they were swimming in my ocean. And tomorrow, the tide goes out. I felt a cold, hard certainty settle over me. The emotional storm had passed. I was no longer the wife, the victim, the scorned woman. I was GV. and I was about to close the most important deal of my life. The boardroom at Ethelred Capital, my boardroom, was a study in understated power. A massive mahogany table gleamed under soft, recessed lighting. On one side, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. The air was cool and still. It was a room designed for executions, both corporate and character. My team was in place. Ben Carter sat to my right, his files arranged in a neat, imposing stack. To my left sat Dr. Aliza Sharma, looking poised and professional in a dark gray suit, her presence a secret weapon they would never see coming. I sat at the head of the table, in a high-backed leather chair that felt like a throne. The door opened, and Richard and Amber walked in. They were a united front of anxiety. Richard wore his best power suit, but his shoulders were tight, his smile forced. Amber was a picture of nervous energy, clutching a leather portfolio to her chest like a shield. Her usual polished confidence had been replaced by a brittle, defensive posture. They stopped short when they saw me. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Richard's face went slack with shock, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from me to Ben, then back to me, the connections clicking into place in his mind with the slow, horrifying grind of a train wreck. Amber's eyes widened, her face paling. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her makeup standing out in stark relief. "Emma," Richard whispered, the name a question, an accusation, and a plea all at once. What is this?" I gave him a small, placid smile, the same smile I had given him the night he'd left. "Richard, Amber, please have a seat. You wanted to meet the principal of Ethelred Capital. Here I am." Ben gestured to the two empty chairs opposite us. They sat down slowly, their movements stiff and robotic, like puppets whose strings had just been cut. "I don't understand," Amber said, her voice thin. "You work for a charity." "The Phoenix Foundation is indeed a charity," I corrected gently. "Ethelred Capital is one of its investment vehicles. It seems you didn't do your due diligence quite as thoroughly as we did." Richard found his voice, a strangled, angry sound. "This is a joke. This is some kind of twisted game. You can't do this." "On the contrary," Ben interjected, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "We can, and we have. Ethelred Capital, under the direction of my client, has legally acquired 100% of InnovateNext's assets and shares. The paperwork is signed. The funds have been transferred to an escrow account. This is the final meeting to formalize the transition of leadership." I let his words hang in the air before I continued. "You were right about one thing, Richard," I said, looking directly at him. "You said you needed a partner who was ambitious and driven. I suppose I should have been more transparent about my own ambitions." I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table. "Let's talk about the company you've built, InnovateNext, a brilliant concept, a revolutionary logistics AI, ITH. N turned my gaze to Amber, who flinched. "An AI, however, that neither of you created." I nodded to Dr. Sharma. "I believe you both know Dr. Aliza Sharma. She was the original architect of the platform, the one you pushed out and whose work you subsequently tried to patent as your own, Amber." Amber's face crumpled. "That's not true. I improved it. I made it commercially viable." Ben slid a file across the table. "Our forensic analysis of the source code says otherwise. Dr. Sharma's digital watermark is on every key algorithm. Your patent application is fraudulent, a clear case of intellectual property theft. A matter, I might add, that could have serious legal ramifications." Richard stared at Amber, a new look of horror dawning on his face. He had been betrayed, too, not by me, but by the very ambition he had so admired in his new partner. He had staked his entire future on a fraud. "Now, let's discuss the terms of the transition," I said, my voice all business. "As the new chairwoman of the board, my first official act is to restructure the company to align with our core values of ethics and integrity." I paused, letting the weight of my next word settle. "Richard, your position as CEO is terminated, effective immediately. Your professional judgment has been compromised by a clear and unethical conflict of interest." He sagged in his chair as if I had physically struck him. "Amber," I continued, my gaze cold and steady, "your position as Chief Technology Officer is also terminated, not only due to the aforementioned conflict of interest, but for cause on the grounds of intellectual property theft. Security is waiting downstairs to escort you both from the building. Your personal effects will be couriered to you. You will, of course, receive the standard 2 weeks severance as outlined in the at-will employment contracts you both signed." Amber let out a small, choked sob. Richard just stared at the gleaming surface of the table, his reflection a mask of utter devastation. His empire had crumbled to dust before it was even built. The big win he had bet his life on had been snatched away by the unambitious wife he had left behind. "The board has unanimously voted to appoint Dr. Aliza Sharma as the new CEO and head of innovation of InnovateNext," I announced. "Congratulations, Aliza." For the first time, Aliza spoke, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you, Emma. I look forward to restoring the company to its original vision." I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "Ben will see you out. I believe we are done here." Richard finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with a toxic brew of hatred, disbelief, and for the first time, a glimmer of terrified respect. He had looked at me for 25 years and had never once truly seen me. Now, in the stark, unforgiving light of that boardroom, he saw me. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The silence that descended upon the boardroom after Richard and Amber were escorted out was profound. It was the calm after a detonation, the air still vibrating with the force of the blast. I stood by the window, looking down at the city below. The cars were tiny, insignificant specks, each one moving with its own purpose, oblivious to the corporate drama that had just unfolded on the 30th floor. Dr. Sharma came to stand beside me. "I don't know what to say, Emma. Thank you isn't enough." "You don't have to say anything," I replied, turning to her with a genuine smile. "You built something brilliant. All I did was remove the obstacles. The company is in the right hands now, your hands." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but her expression was one of fierce determination. The Phoenix Fund had done its job. We had taken a woman who had been wronged, and we had given her back her power. This was my ambition. This was my drive. It wasn't about building a personal empire of wealth. It was about building a coalition of resilient, brilliant women and arming them for success. Ben walked back into the room, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. "It's done," he said. "They're gone." The security detail was very professional. He paused, then added, "Richard's divorce lawyer has been calling my office nonstop for the last 20 minutes. It seems my client's career prospects have suddenly and dramatically improved." I laughed, a real, unburdened laugh. The sound felt freeing. "Let him call. Send him a copy of my last 3 years of tax returns. That should quiet him down." The legal fallout was minimal. Faced with incontrovertible proof of fraud, Amber had no grounds to contest her termination. Richard, humiliated and stripped of his bargaining power, quickly agreed to a quiet, swift divorce. He took his personal belongings and a fraction of our shared liquid assets, a pittance compared to what he had demanded. The lifetime alimony claim vanished without a word. He and Amber broke up less than a moan. Later, their shared dream having turned into a mutual nightmare. The last I heard, Richard had taken a lesser position at a rival firm, his reputation tarnished, his ambition a hollowed-out shell. He had become the very thing he feared, a passenger in his own life. My life, on the other hand, had just begun its most exciting chapter. I moved the Phoenix Fund into a larger, more prominent office, though we still operated with the same discretion. With InnovateNext under Dr. Sharma's brilliant leadership, its value skyrocketed. The returns for my fund were staggering, allowing me to invest in a dozen more startups, helping dozens more women escape their own bad situations and build their own futures. I never set out for revenge. Revenge is a bitter, corrosive thing. What I sought was a rebalancing of the scales. Richard had built his identity on a foundation of condescension, believing his ambition was the only kind that mattered. He saw my quiet strength as weakness, my compassion as a lack of drive. He was wrong. My ambition wasn't louder than his, it was simply smarter, deeper, and more purposeful. Several months later, I was sitting in my new office, the one with my name on the door, Emma Sterling, managing partner, reviewing a new proposal. My son, Michael, who is now a junior partner at a law firm in Chicago, was visiting. He had been horrified by his father's actions, but deeply proud of mine. He walked in with 2 mugs of coffee and set one on my desk. He looked at the plans and charts spread out before me. "Building another empire, Mom?" he asked with a warm smile. I looked up at him, my heart full. The pain of Richard's betrayal had faded, leaving behind not a scar, but a smooth, strong surface of self-knowledge. I felt a sense of profound peace, the kind that comes not from winning a battle, but from knowing you fought for the right reasons. "Something like that," I replied, taking a sip of coffee. "I'm just investing in good people. It turns out to be a very effective business strategy." He looked out the window at the sprawling city, then back at me, his eyes full of admiration. He understood. He saw me for who I was and for who I had always been. And in the end, that was the only validation that ever truly mattered.